Hello, and welcome back to Self Yoga. This is the Letting Go series where I will be reading from my notes on the book Letting Go by David R. Hawkins as we go through a restorative yin slow style of yoga and or meditation. Today we will be covering the topic of grief. Grief's definition is just the process of experiencing loss after a loved one or pet has passed away. This is a definition that's given on a book, but grief is or given on Google. Grief is a lot more complicated than that. There are many books on the topic of grief. There are podcasts. There's a lot of resources. I recommend looking at grief from all these different avenues in order to find the one that best resonates with you. The way that David R. Hawkins describes grief is it's a little, I don't want to call it more complicated. It's actually not. Loss is just much more broad than what we see in that definition. So it's not just losing someone because of death. It can be the ending of a relationship. It can be the ending of a job. It can be the ending of a community or passion project. It can be after the resolution of something. It can even be retirement, right? So I want to talk through grief in that more complex way so that hopefully you're able to find a more simple understanding that can help you identify what grief is, because many of us are grieving and we don't even know it. So I'm currently in yoga therapy training, and grief was our most recent session. And from that, walking away from that, um, I don't want to overcomplicate this. So let me just stick with the David R. Hawkins letting go. But to not seem like I don't know what I'm talking about, when I was in my grief training, I came out of that and I realized that I had been grieving. See, I just caught myself. I was trying to not be vulnerable, but this is a really good opportunity to share. Um, I recognized that I had been holding on to a grief for 22, almost 23 years. And if appropriate, I'll share exactly what that was. But this was the first time I cried about that event since that event. And coming out of it feels very healing, isn't even a word, y'all. Um, I can't say I feel like a new person. I can't say I feel like it's over and it's healed, because that's just not how grief works. But there will come a time where I'm able to explain that more. But for now, I want to focus on the practice. So let's go ahead and settle in. Make your way down onto your mat, your space, wherever it is that you are, and lie on your back. So, in order to start, what I'll have you all do is just begin to breathe. I mentioned that we want to warm up the spine in different ways from the last session, and I want to make sure to honor that. So, to start, I'll demonstrate this as well. Uh, what I'll have everyone do to begin is extend your legs and reach your arms up overhead. So, as you're lying down, what you'll do is just lengthen your body to the best of your ability. Feel the spine extending. Reach those fingertips overhead. And remember, we're lying on our backs, okay? All right. Next, keeping those arms extended, take the right hand and grab your left wrist, and then pull yourself over toward the right. And then begin to walk your heels over toward that right side as well, so that you're kind of making a banana bow over toward the right. Take a breath here. And then as you exhale, make your way back through center, and then we'll switch hands. And then take the left hand toward the over the right wrist, and then begin to side bend toward the left. Sorry for any unnecessary static that's happening here. I think these are only postures that are going to create that microphone sound. All right, on your next exhale, go ahead and make your way back to center. And next, what we'll do is extend the arms overhead, reach up over your head, extend the legs. And then as you exhale, draw your knees into your chest and give yourself a hug. You can feel free to rock back and forth, forward and back, side to side. And what we're doing is just pressing the lower back into the mat, giving ourselves a gentle massage there. Okay. And then one more time, we'll go ahead and slowly release, extend the arms up overhead and extend the legs too. All right. All right. Next, bring your right knee in towards your chest. Give yourself a hug. Extend the left leg. I'm sorry, I didn't mean give yourself a hug. Clasp your fingers underneath the right knee. And then release your right arm out to the side and slowly twist over toward the left, bringing that right knee over the left leg. Keep your gaze along that right arm for a gentle twist. And as you exhale, make your way back through center. Extend the right leg to meet the left. And this time we'll bring the left knee into the chest. Fingertips or fingers wrap around beneath the left knee. And then as you exhale, take that left arm out to the side, bring your gaze over that way as the right knee goes over toward the left knee goes over toward the right side. And back through center. All right, from here, go ahead and lie down and just allow for your arms to fall to the waist sides, okay? Palms facing up toward the ceiling, and bring your awareness to yourself. From whatever space you're in, with your eyes closed, just envision what your body looks like as you lie in this resting pose, and any areas of sensation in the body. See if you can generate a little bit of a light there. So we're looking at an outline of our body, say from an overhead view. It doesn't have to be descriptive, specific. It can just be even in like stick figure. And as there are any sensations in the body, um, the best way that I can describe it is any sort of electricity. It can be a warm sensation, a hot sensation, or a cool sensation, right? And just take the time to breathe regular and identify where there is sensation in the body. And if you feel no sensation, then see what word you would use to describe what that sensation is. Because no sensation is a sensation. Okay? Continue to breathe. And as we take these breaths, continue to emphasize the exhale, okay? Working from our definition of grief, that it's loss. Think about what that means to you. What's a loss you've experienced recently? And not to make this about the loss specifically, but I want for you to apply what we're going to be learning about grief here to that loss and see if it's something that supports you in your grieving process. try and remain still, remembering where the sensations in your body are, whether that be in the fingertips. If you're struggling to stay still, maybe you're wiggling your toes or waving your feet. Oftentimes, people will do this thing where they bounce their knee, and this is just a way of regulating the nervous system. Oftentimes, we're very uncomfortable with stillness. We always feel like we need to be somewhere, we need to be doing something. The only thing we need to be is present, exactly where we are, exactly as we are, and allow ourselves to exist. Our existence is not determined by or threatened by our losses, whether people, places, things, abilities. But there is a process that comes with those losses that has to naturally occur in order for us to be able to reclaim that which was taken from us, that is a part of us. Fragments of our identity is often something overlooked when we talk about grief, when we look at what was lost. When we lose a person, there's also an identity that we had in connection or association with that person that needs to be grieved. There's also the loss of our ideas of what our relationship with that person would be and what our life would look like with that person in it, or with that job, or going through with that passion, that opportunity. So as we think about loss in the context of grief, and we just lie here and we breathe, as I go through the work of David R. Hawkins in the book Letting Go on the chapter of grief, take notice of where sensation arises in your body. Take notice if sensation begins to alleviate itself from your body. Please continue to lie down. You can feel free to keep your eyes closed. If at any point any of this becomes too intense for you and you need to shut this off, you need to pause it and come back later. Maybe you'll need to journal. Please feel free to do so. Take care of yourself however you need to. I'm going to sit up and I'm going to go through the chapter of grief. In grief, we feel things are too difficult, considering time wasted and what if, hopelessness, depression, loss, heartbrokenness, disappointment. Grief is triggered by loss of a role. It's loss of a role that triggers grief. And we think that we'll never get over it. We feel helpless. And when we are feeling whatever the feeling is, we can quickly accept that state and we just allow it. We allow the grief. Resisting the feeling is what makes it linger even longer. As we begin to let go of this grief, what happens is that other people will notice before we do. And we don't know that we're holding on to grief. Other people may even notice that before we do. And there isn't universal language that tells us that. People may go, you look stressed. People may look like, or look at you and go, oh, are you okay? But not have the language. And oftentimes we don't have the self awareness to go within and identify that something's off. But as we begin to let go of grief as well as these other negative emotions, we'll notice that people will notice and point it out to us that there's differences in us. We have to release our fear of feeling the feeling in order to let it go. There's a fear that if we feel this, that it'll never go away. Men especially. There's this fear that if we start crying, we'll never stop crying. There's this fear of if I let myself get mad, I don't know what I'll do. We we have to begin to accept this. We got to accept that we have to allow ourselves to feel the feelings. We work up to other emotions like the positive ones of courage. And that's because it takes courage to let go. It takes courage to cry. It takes courage to be vulnerable. Many of us are afraid to surrender because we are holding onto and attaching to grief. We're attaching to grief, our awareness. Remember, in one of the first classes that we took, it was about identifying our awareness and how fragmented our awareness is. That's very synonymous to what happens with grief, is that we have all of these fragments of our identities associated with our communities, our loved ones, our duties. And in that fragmentation of our awareness, as those people go away, we kind of lose those. Like, we know where they are, whether we consciously know or unconsciously know, right? Like, we have family, we have friends, we have partners, we have um, coworkers, we have community members, right? So each of them knowing us, some of our awareness is there. And as we lose them, or as they move on, there's a sense of grief, and that needs to happen because now that fragment of our awareness is no longer accessible to us in the way that we've known it to be accessible to us. What happens with attachment is that it creates this dependency, and then dependency creates this fear of loss. As we accept the impermanence of it, we can let go. All things are not permanent, and not to say, forget about everything, nothing matters, but because nothing matters, everything matters. And because everything matters, nothing matters. And that's just the spectrum of life that we live on. We waver back and forth until we find that perfect balance of non-attachment. As we look at loss, what happens is that, and we'll use the example of a breakup, right? Like, you don't just know that someone's going to end a relationship with you. You see signs. You may not have accepted the signs, but you've seen them. There are often attempts to strengthen the bond, which forces the other person to resist. Trying to spend more time with a loved one, a partner, and they become more and more distant or resistant to your advances. They're resistant to your requests. There's much more difficulty with spending quality time together, engaging, doing things that you once loved. As we look at our fear of the loss, we really have to ask ourselves really hard questions. Since we can prepare for this, we can see what's coming and we know what we can get from it. And then we can prepare for that feeling of loss. An example here is a loved one may be in the hospital. If it's an aging loved one whose health is on the decline, we can start to ask difficult questions, like, okay, well, what is my life going to look like without this person? And it seems selfish to make it about you, but this is part of the process that can best prepare you for the loss of your identity in relation to that person, that fragment of your attention, that when that person's gone, there's going to be a void there. There's going to be a void, even with relationships, right? Like you have an attachment to a relationship, your awareness is associated, your identity is associated with that person, and that fragment of awareness of yourself is there. And there's a void now that it's no longer attached to. The feeling, the feelings that come up with the fear of loss are sort of like the check engine light. David R. Hawkins does a really good job describing this, that the feelings that come up with fear of loss are like a check engine light being on for us to just check in with our emotions that are often rooted in fear. And it's then that we can let that go. So our feelings are not something to be afraid of. And this is such a good metaphor because how often you done drove around with your check engine light on? How often have you ignored the warning signs and then you can't ignore them once the reason that the check engine light on, which is telling you, hey, you might want to look at this thing. You're like, oh, I ain't gonna worry about that right now. I don't have time. That's not important. That's not a priority. And then that check engine light, the the warning that it gives you is telling you, hey, this something is about to happen. And you ignore it, and then before you know it, you're sitting on the side of the road because your car won't start. So before you know it, you might be having had a breakup because you ignored that check engine light that was like, hey, you maybe need to pay more attention in this area, or maybe you have some things to look at that you're just not. So the check engine light for our emotions oftentimes is when we just feel something, when we feel off. And as you lie down and you just picture, what's happening in your body, what's lighting up for you in that sketch of yourself. As you think about this, maybe there has been a recent experience or a past experience that you can relate to as it comes to grief, and you might feel a sensation of tension or tightness or pressure in your chest, in your shoulders, maybe in your back, could even be in your knees. Let's look at grief as it relates to anger. So, the loss of something important could trigger rage at the world and even at God. How often have you heard someone say, oh, I'm being punished by God? God did this to me, or they curse God, or even want to just punish somebody else for the thing that happened to them and making it happen to somebody else. Our body itself is an attachment, and even that has to be let go of. And it's the ultimate attachment to fear of loss, not just like limbs, but abilities. Look at how we attach to our youth, our beauty, our capabilities, our strength, our looks. I said beauty already, but looks too, as the same thing, just to emphasize it. All relationships are transitory. We may attempt to avoid loss by becoming more blank into whatever. And we might even, what we don't understand is that this is using manipulation and overcompensation to prevent the loss. In relationships, how often have we overspent or tried to look better than we are? Or we do what we think the other person wants us to do, and we try and do so that they stay. Oh, just stay. Or if there's a good a general understanding of this would be um, knowing that a relationship is about to be lost and then clinging onto that even more, maybe attaching to um, by making a baby, like a baby's going to fix the problem. or bringing that person around your family more, and like reminding them how much they love your family or how much your family loves them. Going back, what this does is it creates resistance. It creates resistance from the other person. So another thing that this is it's an expression of denial. Once we see that our attempts to bring in more closeness in something that we're in the process of losing doesn't work, we start to see the real fear of the feelings to let go of our own resistance to just the loss itself. If we can begin to plunge into that feeling, what we can do is let it go. If we begin to plunge into that feeling, what we can do is let it go. There's this cycle of anger and loss too, and they can fuel each other. The loss of a child, the ending of a relationship through divorce, these are really intense and unique experiences of grief. And there's a story in the book. Please get this book, Letting Go by David R. Hawkins. There's a story in grief about the loss of a child, and I can't relate to, or I can't relate or articulate that in any other way than what's said in the book. So if you are somebody who has gone through that, who is going through that, I, my teacher said this, I accompany you in your feeling. I can't feel what you feel. There's nothing that I can do about it. All I can do is offer just the presence that you permit me to have in being with you in the feeling that you are experiencing. David R. Hawkins goes on to say that there's a cycle of anger and loss too, and that they fuel each other. We talked about the loss of a child already. I'm at the line before that I just read back up. My bad, y'all. Accepting is what frees up healthy and creative aspects of the self, and we see more aliveness within ourselves. Accepting is what frees up healthy and creative aspects of the self, and we see more aliveness within ourselves. So if you can picture this, that fragmented awareness that I spoke of, where we're in all of the different connections that we have, where our attention, our awareness is with coworkers at our job, our passions, our intramural sports teams, our even our friends that we watch sports with, our friends, right? Any lost there. Something as simple as if your job changes buildings, right? Like you now have to let go of the drive that you would take to work, the route that you would go on, the place that you would get your coffee from, the traffic, right? All of these are things that can be let go of that seem so insignificant, but they're small enough that if we can begin the process of experiencing the connection of grief, the feelings underneath the grief of our connection with those in our identity, we can begin to draw our awareness back to ourselves. And I think that that's what this means here about acceptance, being able to free up ourselves from so becoming so interconnected with what we're attached to that we make that part of our identity, and then we lose ourselves and that thing that there's a loss of. So remaining healthily unattached, even in our fragmentation of awareness and attention, allows for us to more easily be able to bring our attention and awareness back to ourselves, so that we are accepting of the impermanence of loss, of the impermanence of all things and loss. We can feel stuck in this state whenever we refuse to work through an emotion. Unconscious holding on to the energetic intensity of negative emotions will manifest into physical illnesses. With the access of information that we have today, we see that traditional medicine is very good at treating disease. It does a good job of treating disease. We do really well with if there's something that needs to be cut off, surgery is great for that. Pain medication, there's something for that. But there is no medication for a lot of the illnesses that manifest as a result of holding on to negative emotions that manifest into physical illness. We can treat the symptoms, but the disease stays. And I'm not going to go into the names of which ones because I can't talk enough about each one of those, but high blood pressure is a common one, chronic illness is another, fibromyalgia. Um, that's where I'll stop. So, one type of grief and loss is anger at the person who caused it. Using death as an example, of course, like we can be angry at the person who died. Think about how we can be angry at the person for dying, and it doesn't make sense. But neither do feelings. Feelings don't make sense either. We can turn that anger in toward ourselves, which adds to that intensity and the weight of the emotion. So because that person's not here for us to be like, I'm angry at you, how could you do this to me? Because they died. Who do we direct that anger towards? Who do we direct the feelings, the intensity towards? The world around us, God. But there's actual consequences for being angry at the world. God doesn't respond right away. Maybe you don't have a relationship with God or believe in God. So who's left to get those feelings? It's ourselves. And that's where the self-punishment might come in. And these emotions are heavy. Heavy emotions are, they just are. But we can add to the weight of them by increasing the intensity, by resisting them. If we allow emotions to run their course by identifying them and being like, okay, well, here's what that is. All right. And we can understand its connection, association to the event that may have triggered the emotion, man, we do way better. We do better in allowing the emotions. Now, for preventing grief, early recognition, and while feelings are still mild, this is when we need to look at them. So, best case, before that check engine light cut on, right? Notice how your car is driving. Notice how your body feels, right? So even in this state, lying down, before we started talking about grief, there was a state that your body was in. As we're talking about it, and as you may be having emotions come up, you may see the whole entirety of your body lighting up as right now you're having more understanding of grief than you may have been given before. Let that run its course. Let it run its course. And as you notice any of those sensations that you might have discovered along the way here, along this class, that's the check engine light cutting on. We can't deny the transitory nature of relationships, and we can't hold on to our attachments, especially on people and then external attachments, just because that shows more fear and vulnerability to loss. We have to ask those hard questions preemptively, exercise our lovingness, and that's how we can graduate to greatness and become invulnerable to loss. We there's this Satori. There's a yoga story where um, what does he say? There's a meditation. I forget whose it is, but it's die before you die, right? So you meditate on death daily and you're able to more fully live life. I don't remember who said that. I don't, I'm sorry, I can't reference that. This is one of the reasons I do not like teaching classes, is because there are things that come up that people want reference to that I'm not able to recall right away. But if you can search the just die before you die yoga or meditation, you'll find out who it is. But Some of our preparations that can make us see our own selfish inner needs, like self worth and value, it helps with the attachment. It alleviates the sense of the devastation that can come from losing that which we are attached to. Then we learn our smaller self has a large attachment so that we can become our greater self and minimize that attachment. When we continuously let go, we replace fear with trust and become immune to the grief of loss. I ain't gonna sit up here and say that we're gonna be immune to any kind of loss, no matter how good you get at this technique, especially if you're at the point of coming into contact with this information as an adult, because there's so much to grieve. There's so much that the body, the nervous system knows and has held on to, that when we become aware of it, we also become aware of what we might not have ever been aware of. And then we have to process that grief. And it seems like something that there's just no time for. But it, one, we don't have time not to feel these emotions because the time is being taken from us by not feeling them. There are ways that we navigate the world, navigate our relationships that we're not even in control of because of our grief that we've been holding on to, because of the intensity that we add to it. So it's important that we identify the feelings of the grief, that we know what that feels like so that we can intentionally make space for it. Our homework for this session is to look at, again, just the fragmentations of our awareness and what we might be attached to, and see where we can begin to let go. Like I'm picturing just like claws covering. Like if you just, yeah, I'm holding one hand over my fist, and this represents attachment to an awareness. Our awareness, the attachment is the merging of the two things, but they can still have a relationship even if they're not making physical contact. Okay. So let's call this work. And let's say my awareness at work, right? Work is a bundle of things. There's five fingers on a fist. So let's say those five things are our coworkers, our boss, our role, the commute, and then our favorite parking spot, right? So as I come over that bundle of which makes up work, I can begin to detach by going, okay, I can start to look at and let go of my parking spot. Okay. All right. Now my relationship to my coworkers. Now my relationship to my boss. Now my role at the job. Right. And there's a distance that's been created because we're able to let go of those things. So now it becomes easier to find a job that pays you more, that has bosses that treat you better, that gives you a role that you are much more aligned with, right? So now you can still maintain the relationship, and it's healthy enough to where you can either be in that place of employment, or you can be able to look for another job. Because when we're here, the idea of looking for a new job, despite how uh, resistant you might be to losing your coworker's parking spot, your role, your relationship to your boss as the secretary, right? So our exercise is to identify a thing in our life, a role that we have, and identify five parts of what that role is that we can slowly begin to detach ourselves from, so that we're able to just see it for its fragments and be able to reclaim our attention and awareness, or place it somewhere that's more healthy for us. So, this thing that we're attached to doesn't necessarily have to be harmful to us, but if it is or does cause harm, that will make it a lot easier for us to see it for what it is, detach, be able to let go, and free our attention and awareness enough to be able to identify something new that we can um, that we can have a relationship with that's healthier for us. So, in short, if it's a question answer, identify one area of your life where there is an intense attachment to. And what we're going to do is break that into five things so that we can begin to detach ourselves from it. And in that process, there's going to be grieving. So, your role, your job is going to be to identify those five parts of the bigger thing so that we can begin to surrender it and see what it feels like. See what it feels like to go from fully attaching to that job to beginning to see that you're more actually attached to one aspect of that job so that you can then grieve that and let it go. That's the best process I can give us for grieving. All right. Feel free to stay here as long as you need to. I appreciate your presence and I hope that this is something that's useful to you. For next week, we will go into fear. Ooh, fear's got a lot of pages. So, yeah, be ready for that one, y'all.